Why are you working inventory, James? A nurse I met at a mixer with pharmacists and nurses asked me this while I was doing inventory at the drugstore. Before I could answer, Brian, a pharmacist at the same workplace, jumped in and said, "This guy didn't put in the effort like we did in school. So he can only get part-time jobs." Just then, one of the male pharmacists suddenly collapsed, and I quickly responded, "Hey, James, who are you really?" The nurses who helped me began to realize something about me. I'm James. I help out at home during the day and work part-time doing inventory at a drugstore at night. When I say help out at home, I mean I help my sister, not my parents. Our parents passed away 15 years ago when my sister was in college and I was in middle school. Since then, I've been able to live and go to school thanks to my sister's support, and I'm grateful to her. Now, by helping her, I feel like I'm repaying her for everything. My sister is a comic artist. Even when she was in college, her work was already being published in commercial magazines, and she had a dedicated fan base. However, as she became more famous, she couldn't handle the pressure, started having trouble sleeping and eating, and gradually felt unwell. On top of that, our parents passing in disputes over inheritance with relatives added to her stress. To make matters worse, some of the media sensationalized these events, further distressing her. As if that wasn't enough, she was betrayed by her boyfriend at the time over money issues. After all these ordeals, my sister put down her pen. Though her readers and editors expected her to return, after about 3 years, new artists and hit works emerged. And the number of people waiting for her sequel dwindled. I also thought her work was great and was curious about the sequel, but she seemed more at ease being forgotten by the world. So I never mentioned it. After recovering, she started drawing comics again under a new pen name. By then, no publishers were interested in her work, so she started her own agency. She continues to draw comics at her own pace. Because she still sometimes suffers from anxiety and depression. I, being her only family, willingly take on her daily health management and work support. While my sister is sensitive, I'm quite tough, so it's only natural for me to help her. Besides, I believe part of her mental strain is my fault. Despite being very sensitive, when our parents suddenly died in an accident, she kept a brave face for my sake, handling all the aftermath perfectly. Considering she had her own work and college studies, she must have been overwhelmed. I only realized the harshness of the world and the frightening nature of public criticism after I entered society. My sister took on all the unpleasant things, which led to her developing anxiety. She completely lost trust in anyone but me. That's why I've decided to live a life where I can help my sister rather than focusing on myself. Working at the drugstore allows my sister to have some time alone at home. People at work don't know this and think I'm a 30-year-old living off my sister, enjoying a carefree life with a part-time job. I don't mind what they think. Hey, James. This orange juice doesn't belong on this shelf. How do you keep making such simple mistakes? Brian, the pharmacist, says to me. He's the most annoying guy at work. Every day he finds something to nag me about. Since this drugstore accepts prescriptions late into the evening, Brian is often around when I'm doing inventory. Brian, shouldn't you be in the pharmacy area? Customers might leave again because you're not there, like last time. I can't help but say something unnecessary every time. Brian is probably around my age. He was already here when I started working. You noisy part-timer, just fix the shelf quickly. But seriously, Brian is a terrible pharmacist. I wonder how he even passed the exam. His work, his conversations, everything is sloppy and lacks responsibility. He says reckless things with complete confidence. Having a pharmacist like that is not good. Though he irritates me, I make sure to teach him properly. I see it as contributing to the workplace. Brian, this isn't juice. Look closely, it's a canned cocktail. Ha! It says Mandarin on it. So confusing and annoying. With that, Brian lazily shuffled back to the pharmacy corner. I've heard many stories about Brian's mistakes as a pharmacist since I started working here. He even once made an error in the dosage of tablets he prescribed. Fortunately, Lauren, another pharmacist, noticed it right away and corrected it. But there are customers who refuse to come in if Brian is the only pharmacist available. I wouldn't want Brian handling my prescriptions either. Honestly, I wouldn't want to talk to him at all. Yet, Brian comes up to me every day to say something. And I always end up giving a cheeky response. This only makes him dislike me more. Is it my fault for engaging with him, even though I think it doesn't matter? Brian has no one to talk to at work because of his sloppiness and rudeness. Though it's a workplace, so that's not really necessary. He doesn't seem to have friends outside of work either, maybe he's lonely. I end up responding because I feel a bit sorry for him. I sometimes think maybe I'm lonely too, since I don't really have any close friends. But I'm confident in my self-awareness, unlike Brian. When I got home, my sister nervously approached me. "James, can I talk to you?" She looked haggard. She must have been working on her manuscript without sleeping again. "What is it, sis?" "I want you to look at this." This part feels a bit unnatural to me. I checked the part of the manuscript she pointed out. In my opinion, it wasn't unnatural, but since she felt it was, maybe changing the flow slightly would help. I'll adjust this part so the story doesn't change. "You should get some rest and eat something." She looked a bit relieved. My sister works on her comic without any assistance and sometimes can't tell if what she's drawn is good or bad, so she asks me to check. When she's not feeling well, it must be hard to make decisions alone, so I always make sure to check thoroughly. "James, I'm sorry. I'm ruining your life, aren't I?" I smiled at her. "What are you talking about? I'm doing this because I want to. Now, stop worrying and get some sleep. Resting is also part of your job." Once she fell asleep, I started adjusting the manuscript's flow. I reflected on my life as she mentioned it. I spent longer in college than most. My sister paid for my tuition. After finally getting a job, my sister's mental health deteriorated significantly. Realizing she'd been holding herself together for my sake all this time, I decided to quit my job. She probably feels guilty about that. But if it weren't for her, I wouldn't have survived. The most important thing in my life is helping her. One day, when I went to work in the evening, Brian approached me. "Hey. Oh, the shelves look neat today. You did a good job for once." He seemed to be in a good mood. Still as annoying as ever. "I don't need your praise, Brian." "What's up? Did something good happen?" Brian grinned and said, "I got invited to a mixer with some beautiful nurses." Lucky, right? Last night, there was a study session for pharmacists and nurses. And that's where it was set up. He must be excited about his plans. What a simple guy. Don't you want to go? But you can't, because you're not in the medical field. Too bad for you. If only you'd studied harder in school, right? Looks like you'll be living the part-time life forever. I understand him being happy, but does he really need to tease me this much? Today, Brian is particularly persistent. I'm not interested. Even when I clearly say that, Brian keeps at it. Just as I was getting fed up, Lauren, another pharmacist, stormed over. "Brian, get back to work now." Lauren has been working here longer than Brian. Unlike him, she doesn't make mistakes and is very diligent. I secretly respect her. "What's your problem, Lauren? You serious pharmacists should seek out relationships too, or you'll end up old and alone. Why don't you try going to a mixer with doctors? Christmas is coming up." Lauren looked at Brian with a disgusted expression and said, "I'm not going to a mixer. And categorizing people by their professions is wrong. Every job contributes to society. Now, get back to work." Brian was forcibly taken away by Lauren. I admired how sensible Lauren's words were and focused on doing inventory. A few days later, I had a day off from my part-time job and was wandering around town. If I don't spend some time out of the house, my sister feels extra pressure. On days without work, I just walk around outside like this, without any particular purpose. It was the weekend, and the streets were busy with Christmas decorations. Friends, couples, families, groups. I like people watching. Watching people, you can't tell their age or profession, but their actions and gestures reveal what they're thinking. That person seems drunk, but is actually carefully avoiding empty cans. Maybe he has something important to tell the girl next to him today. The other person is constantly fiddling with their phone while glancing around. Perhaps they want to appear like they're not waiting for their date to arrive. It's interesting to think about human psychology, even if my guesses are sometimes off. It's tough to see someone as distressed as my sister, but if I can help lighten her burden, it's worth it. As I walked with the flow of people, I ended up at a place with impressive illuminations. It was the garden of a luxury foreign-owned hotel. The publicly accessible area was bustling with people who came to see the decorations. I stood there, admiring the lights. Suddenly, I heard my name. "Hey, isn't that James?" I turned around and saw Brian. He was wearing a shiny suit and pointed leather shoes. He looked very dressed up. "Man, James. This isn't a place for hoodies and jeans. And you're alone? Watching the illuminations by yourself? That's sad." I explained that I was just out for a walk, but Brian kept mocking me with excitement. "James, you really are pathetic. You look even more miserable here than you do at work." Tired of his taunting, I decided to leave. But Brian stopped me. "Hey, how about I invite you too? We're going to that mixer I mentioned. You won't get another chance like this. I'll treat you. You look so pitiful." I thought for a moment. It was still early to go home, and it was cold. Any place to eat would probably be crowded tonight. I'm also a bit curious about the people who will be at the mixer. "Alright, I'll give it a try. I'll go." Brian gave a smug smile and said, "Haha. Good, let's do it." I knew what Brian was planning. He'd probably use me as a topic to mock in front of everyone. Not that it bothered me. The mixer was held in a lounge on an upper floor. The lighting was dimmed to enjoy the night view, so I couldn't really see people's faces well, but I was just there to observe anyway. "Hey everyone," I ran into my friend downstairs. He looked so lonely that I brought him along. "This is James, our part-timer." Brian introduced me to everyone. There were 4 male pharmacists, including Brian, and 4 female nurses, sitting across from each other on sofas. They set up a single chair for me, like the seat of honor at a birthday party. After the toast, everyone started making small talks, feeling each other out. It was dark, but you could tell from the way they held their glasses that there was a mix of nervousness and excitement. "So, where do you all work?" "I work at the drugstore on 4th Street, and this guy here is just an inventory part-timer." Being a pharmacist must be tough. Well, there is some tension in the job. But this guy here has it easy. Brian kept roping me into the conversation, probably because he was very nervous. And maybe a bit guilty for the lies he was telling. "Hey, your name's James, right? Why are you working as an inventory part-timer?" One of the nurses, Jessica, asked me. "I live with my sister, and..." "Oh, this guy's just living off his sister. He didn't put in the effort like we did in school, so he's stuck with part-time jobs." Brian cut me off with his nonsensical explanation. "I see." At that moment, one of the pharmacists, Michael, interrupted. "James? Did you always want to be a part-timer? Didn't you have any dreams? And why are you wearing jeans?" Michael was gulping down wine like juice and was already quite drunk. As I was trying to figure out how to respond, not only Michael but the other pharmacists also started throwing rough words at me. Following Brian's lead. "James, is this your first time at a luxury hotel? Those clothes are inappropriate. While I respect all jobs, you should have learned some social norms. James, aren't you worried about working hourly? Without a solid career, marriage might be tough for you." The men were all drunk and rude. The women seemed put off by their behavior. Except for Jessica, the other nurses were taking selfies and eating, as if they were already a separate group. This mixer is a disaster. I might as well leave. Just as I thought that, Jessica spoke to me again. "I think I've met you before, James." I tried to get a better look at Jessica's face, but the backlight from the night view made it hard to see. Where would that be?" "Maybe at the college hospital nearby." "What, James? Were you hospitalized? Could Jessica have been your nurse then?" "I've never been hospitalized. More importantly, can Brian not hold a conversation without involving me? This isn't even a proper mixer anymore." Feeling like there was no point in staying, I started wrapping my scarf to leave. Just then, there was a loud crash at the table. The noise made the entire lounge go silent. Michael had collapsed, face first onto the glass table. Plates, glasses, and a wine bottle shattered, and even in the dim light, I could see that the area was covered in red. "Sir! Are you all right, sir?" A hotel staff member nearby rushed over and tried to lift Michael. "Stop. Check his condition first." I couldn't help but shout. You shouldn't move someone before assessing their condition. I went over to Michael, brushed away the glass shards, picked up a small table lamp that had fallen, and shone it on his face. His face was pale. I checked his breathing and pulse next. His breathing was shallow and his pulse was slow. He was unresponsive, and there was food coming out of his mouth. Most concerningly, his body was rapidly getting cold. This must be acute alcohol poisoning. Brian, help me get Michael onto the sofa. Lay him on his side so his airway stays clear. What? Neither Brian nor the other men moved, they were all paralyzed with fear. We'll do it. The female nurses pushed the men aside and carefully but swiftly moved Michael. Call an ambulance, please. James, what else? The nurses were moving efficiently. His temperature is dropping from incontinence. We need to keep him warm. Loosen his upper clothing first. Got it. I took off my scarf and hoodie and covered Michael's feet with them. I unbuckled his belt and tried to find a way to keep his waist warm. I had nothing else to take off. Brian, can you lend us your jacket? But it's brand new. One of the female nurses pushed aside the dithering Brian and offered her own coat. My coat is lined with fur, it'll help keep him warm. Use it. The nurses dealt with the fluids and solid matter coming from Michael's body without hesitation. They really were professionals. I was grateful they were here. This is acute alcohol poisoning, right? As Jessica asked me if it was acute alcohol poisoning, I responded with a firm yes, while continuing to speak to Michael. Michael, can you hear me? Can you respond? There was nothing more we could do at this point. With him unconscious, he couldn't drink water. I kept calling out to him. Being on such a high floor in the hotel, it would take time for the paramedics to arrive. I hoped he would regain consciousness soon. A sound came from Michael's mouth. I kept talking to him. Hurts, it's hurting. Michael, you'll be okay. You'll get to the hospital soon. Try to drink some water. Let me handle it. James, you should take care of your hand. One of the nurses took over for me. I looked at my hands. They were cut by the glass and covered in blood. Everything stung and ached. The other customers in the lounge were staring at our table. Applause broke out from somewhere. Suddenly, I felt embarrassed. I needed to take care of my hands first, so I left and rushed to the restroom. Upon washing and inspecting my hands, I found some deep cuts. With no other option, I pressed my hands against my jeans and left the restroom. Although I felt a bit out of place in my casual outfit, I was glad I wore cheap jeans tonight. Not that I expected any of this. The paramedics safely transported Michael, and the hotel staff were cleaning up. While the men looked lost, the women applauded me again. Hey, James, you're not just a part-timer, are you? Who are you really? Well, actually. As I was about to answer, Jessica spoke up first. You're Dr. James Anderson from T College Hospital, right? You helped me during my nurse training. Everyone used to talk about how you were expected to excel in both surgery and internal medicine, but you chose psychiatry. Looking closely, I did recognize Jessica's face. And all the women were indeed quite attractive. What, a doctor? James, you were a doctor? Brian's eyes widened in shock. Before I could respond, Jessica continued. That's not all. Dr. Anderson is also the medical advisor for the popular comic, Dr. B. Isn't that right, Dr. Anderson? At this, the other pharmacists leaned forward in excitement. That comic? I'm a huge fan. I'm stunned. My apologies, Dr. Anderson. Dr. B is a comic my sister created to honor me after I quit being a doctor. She put a lot of effort into the story, ensuring my involvement would earn me a proper salary. Fortunately, her hard work paid off, and the comic became a hit. While not as famous as my sister's other works, it's well regarded in the medical community. So, it's not like I'm living off my sister's income alone. Dr. Anderson, may I shake your hand? I started to extend my hand but then realized something. It needed to stay pressed against my jeans to stop the bleeding. Oh, sorry. My hand is cut. The women offered to help with my hand, but I politely declined, as we didn't have the necessary supplies. I'm sorry. I need to leave now. With both hands pressed against my jeans, I left hurriedly, maintaining a rigid, military-like stance. When I got home, my sister was asleep. I was relieved she didn't have to worry and took care of my injured hands myself. The next day, I went to work and found myself in a bit of a predicament. I had carefully bandaged my cut hands, but while carrying boxes, the corners kept pressing into the wounds, causing immense pain. Despite the pain, there were no other staff to help with doing inventory, so I had to endure it. Oddly enough, Brian didn't come over to bother me. In fact, he didn't move from the pharmacy counter at all. He just stared into space, only snapping back to reality when Lauren gave him instructions. He's getting paid, so he should be working. To distract myself from the pain, I decided to go talk to him. Brian. Yikes. What is it, James? I mean, Dr. Anderson. Please, don't call me that here. I'm just a part-timer. Why are you spacing out? Brian avoided making eye contact with me. I guess he's regretting how the mixer didn't go well. Given it happened just yesterday, it's understandable. It can't be helped. It's your fault. What? Just because you have a medical degree, everyone calls you doctor. And you get all the attention. It's all your fault. I was confused and didn't know how to respond. Suddenly, Brian looked directly at me. I was taken aback. I recognized that expression. It was the same as patients with severe depression. Moreover, it was the face of someone whose paranoia and blaming tendencies had escalated to the point of lashing out at others. Brian, let's calm down, okay? You've been looking down on me from the start, haven't you? Brian jumped over the reception counter and swung at me. I tried to dodge, but the blow landed squarely on my injured hand, and I couldn't avoid it completely. Brian punched me repeatedly in the face and stomach as I reeled from the pain. Ah! Someone call the police! The cashier girl screamed. Even as I was being hit, I thought to myself, Brian has extremely low self-esteem. His resentment toward others stemmed from it. I stopped resisting and let Brian hit me as he pleased. I didn't think that would satisfy Brian, and I knew it wouldn't solve the underlying problem. But it was more important to let him release his pent-up energy for the moment. The police arrived, and we were both taken to the station. I was released quickly, but Brian wasn't. Despite my insistence that I wouldn't press charges. When I got home, I couldn't hide it from my sister this time. Seeing my bruised face, she nearly fainted. James, it's because I made you work that part-time job. Once it gets to this point, nothing I say will help. Both my sister and Brian were temporarily too unstable to listen. Trying to explain things rationally at such times is pointless. I just listened quietly as my sister spoke her mind. A few days later, when I returned to work at the drugstore, Brian wasn't there. In his place, there were more unusual customers. Isn't that the guy? The one who supervises Dr. B? Yeah, the one who works here doing inventory. Lauren told me what had happened. Brian had posted on a national message board that the medical supervisor for Dr. B works at the drugstore on 4th Street, doing inventory. He's an arrogant guy. That's why some comic fans had come by. Additionally, Brian had been released by the police but was hospitalized due to persistent mental instability. I reflected on the situation. My identity being revealed wasn't a big deal for me. But for my sister, it could trigger flashbacks of past media harassment. For Brian, realizing what he had done could be deeply scarring once he returned to a normal mental state. And for the workplace, unnecessary attention was far from ideal. The right thing to do was for me to quit the part-time job. I spoke with the manager, John, and resigned from the drugstore. I spent my days aimlessly killing time from evening until night. After about a month of this went by, one day, I came home to find my sister waiting in the living room. "James, I have something to tell you." "Okay, what is it?" My sister looked calm. "I'm getting married." "What?" I was utterly shocked, but my sister remained composed. I hadn't mentioned it before, but David from K Publishing proposed to me. I knew David. He handled the promotion for my sister's comic. I had always thought that someone as capable as David could take care of my sister. So they were dating. "And I want you to go back to the hospital, James. What you want most is to help people who are struggling, right?" "I'm okay now. Thank you for everything." I felt conflicted, but if my sister said so, it seemed best to congratulate her and move on. However, I had doubts about returning to the hospital. I couldn't even help someone like Brian. I don't have much ability. Having a license and motivation isn't enough to handle people's hearts without the right skills. Congratulations. I'm happy for you. But give me some time to think about my situation. I told my sister this. Over the next 2 weeks, I pondered what to do. I hit a wall when thinking about how I could help others, then another when considering what I wanted to do. I had believed my purpose was to support my sister, but now that she didn't need me, I wasn't sure what to do next. I had always prided myself on being objective, but this personal dilemma was too heavy for me. I realized my experience with patients was still very limited. One day, I received an email from Lauren. "The trouble at the store has settled down. Can we talk? Please come by." I chose a quiet time with few customers and headed to the drugstore for the first time in a while. Lauren greeted me with a kind smile. "Long time no see. What are you doing now?" Taking comfort in her kindness, I honestly shared that I didn't know what to do. It felt like the first time in my life that I had been this candid about my feelings. I trusted Lauren greatly. "James. Dr. Anderson, I think you should work as a doctor. I saw how you always took care of each staff member. You were perfect in your role." I admitted to Lauren that I didn't see myself that way. Lauren kept her gentle expression and said, "Here's the address where Brian is hospitalized. Maybe you should visit him." The note Lauren gave me had an address that was relatively close by. A few days later, I went to see Brian. He looked surprisingly calm. "Hey, Dr. Anderson. I'm doing well." He seemed a bit embarrassed. "I'm glad your mental state has improved." When I said this, Brian looked into my face and said, "Wow. I've never seen that look on your face before. Are you really troubled?" "I did some bad things, but now that I'm calm. I realize you were really sincere with someone like me who was reckless and self-destructive." For the first time in my life, I reflected on my actions and decided to live more seriously. I hadn't expected Brian to say such things. "You quit the job at the drugstore, right? Because of me." "I'm sorry." "Hey, why are you crying?" "Stop it. It's shocking to see you cry. Stop. Cut it out." I was so happy that I burst into tears. Seeing someone who had been struggling mentally recover and talk about living seriously made me deeply happy. "Thank you. I'm really happy that something reached you and that you're feeling better." Brian responded, "This is such a hassle, but I'll say it properly." "Thank you, Dr. Anderson." I couldn't stop my tears. Brian's words saved me. They gave me the confidence to start over as a doctor. I returned to the psychiatric department at the college hospital. While I can't help everyone, there are people whose mental recovery I can support. I intend to help with all my heart. I will continue to assist my sister with her comic, but my mission to help isn't just limited to her. I realized that I had a certain arrogance in thinking that my own perspective was all that mattered. Thanks to this experience, and the efforts of Lauren and Jessica, I was able to establish connections with the pharmacist group and the nurse group. I hope to make the most of these connections in a positive way. I gained a lot of experience from both my sister and Brian. I also realized that, fundamentally, I have faith in people. I will strive to become a doctor who can be even closer to the people I help.